I found the ornament in a dusty box at an estate sale. It wasn't like the rest of the decorations scattered on the table. This one was a heavy glass ball with intricate patterns etched in gold. The seller, an older woman, seemed eager to get rid of it. She waved me off when I asked about its history, muttering something about bad memories. I didn't think much of it. It looked unique and vintage, so I bought it for a few bucks. Back home, I hung it on my tree, right in the center where it could catch the light. It was perfect there, its golden designs glowing softly. For the first few days, I barely noticed it beyond admiring its beauty. Then, little things started happening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was standing at the foot of my bed. There was never anyone there, of course, but the feeling lingered. A few days later, my dog Max started acting strange around the tree. He would sit and growl softly, his fur bristling, staring directly at the ornament. I thought maybe it reflected light in a way that spooked him, so I moved it to a different branch. It didn't help. One evening I was watching TV when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The ornament was slowly spinning on its own, as if someone had nudged it. The heater wasn't on, and there was no draft. I convinced myself it was just settling on the branch, though the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. That night I woke up to a faint sound like whispering. It was coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I tiptoed down the hallway. The whispering stopped as soon as I entered the room. Everything looked normal, except for the ornament. It had fallen off the tree and was lying on the floor, unbroken. I picked it up and set it back on the branch, telling myself I was overreacting. But as I turned to leave, I felt it. That awful, creeping sensation of being watched. My eyes darted back to the tree. The ornament was facing me now, the etched patterns forming what looked disturbingly like a pair of eyes. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I decided to get rid of it. I didn't want to throw it away in my house, so I drove to a nearby park and left it by the dumpster. When I got home, I felt a weight lift off me. The house seemed lighter, quieter. But that night, as I got ready for bed, I saw it. Sitting on my kitchen counter was the ornament, its golden eyes gleaming under the dim light. I don't know what to do now. I can't seem to get rid of it, and every time I try, it finds its way back. It feels like it's watching me, waiting for something. Christmas has never felt so suffocating. Last December, I decided to skip the whole Christmas decorating thing. I had just moved into a new apartment, and honestly, I wasn't in the holiday spirit. But my neighbor, MS Carter, wouldn't hear of it. She was this sweet old lady who lived across the hall and practically embodied Christmas. She dropped by one morning holding a wreath. She said she made it herself and thought my door looked too bare. I didn't have the heart to turn her down. The wreath was nice enough, with its fake holly berries, tiny gold bells, and a big red bow. I thanked her, hung it on my door, and figured that was the end of it. The first night, I noticed the wreath had a faint smell, like pine needles mixed with something else. It wasn't unpleasant, just odd since it was clearly artificial. I shrugged it off and went to bed. The next morning, the smell was stronger, almost sharp, like the air after a lightning storm. I opened the door to see if maybe someone had spilled something in the hallway, but the smell was definitely coming from the wreath. I figured maybe it was treated with some weird scent that got stronger over time. By the third day, I started hearing noises. It was faint at first, like a soft rustling sound. I thought it was the wind, even though the hallway was completely enclosed. Then I noticed the berries on the wreath. They weren't plastic anymore. They looked plump and ripe, almost too vibrant to be real. I asked Miss Carter about it, trying to be polite. She just smiled and said the wreath had a way of taking care of itself. That answer didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push it. That night the noises got louder. It sounded like something scratching against my door. I opened it, expecting to see someone messing with me, but the hallway was empty. The wreath, though, looked different. The red bow had frayed edges, and the gold bells were tarnished. The holly leaves seemed to have grown sharper, their edges curling like claws. I took the wreath down and put it on my kitchen table, thinking I'd get rid of it in the morning. But when I woke up, it was back on the door. I stood there staring at it, my stomach twisting in knots. How could it have gotten back there? That day I left for work feeling uneasy. When I came home, the smell in my apartment was unbearable. It was like rotting fruit mixed with decaying leaves. I checked the wreath, but it looked the same as before. I tried to take it down again, but when I touched it, I swear it felt warm, almost alive. I didn't know what else to do, so I tossed it in the trash chute. I felt a weird mix of relief and guilt as I watched it disappear into the darkness. That night, I heard a knock on my door. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty, but the wreath was back on the door. This time it looked worse. The berries had burst, oozing a dark, sticky liquid that dripped onto the floor. The holly leaves were withered and blackened, and the bow hung limply, as if it had been soaked in water. I didn't touch it again. I taped up my door with garbage bags, trying to block the smell, but it didn't help. The scratching noises kept me awake all night. Carter was waiting for me in the hallway. She asked if I was enjoying the wreath. I couldn't hide my frustration and told her it was creeping me out. She just chuckled and said that some decorations aren't meant to be ignored. I don't know what she meant by that, but I didn't stick around to ask. I left the apartment and checked into a hotel for the night. When I came back the next day, the wreath was gone. For a moment I thought I was free, but then I noticed something. The smell was still there, faint but unmistakable. And when I looked at my door, there was a faint outline where the wreath had hung, as if it had burned itself into the wood. I haven't seen MS, Carter, since then. Her apartment is empty, and no one seems to know where she went. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint scratching sounds, like something trying to get in. I keep telling myself it's just my imagination, but deep down I know better. Some things aren't meant to be gifted, and some traditions aren't meant to be revived. I've always loved Christmas trees. There's something magical about the soft glow of the lights and the way ornaments reflect tiny bursts of warmth. This love for trees is why, last year, I went all out. My plan was to find the perfect live tree to brighten up my living room. Little did I know, I'd end up with something far from festive. It started at a local tree lot. It was early December, and the place was bustling with families picking their trees. I wandered through the rows of evergreens, inhaling the fresh, crisp scent of pine. None of them felt right, though. Some were too short, others too lopsided. Then, tucked in the corner, I saw it, a tall, symmetrical fir tree that practically glowed under the string lights. The lot owner said no one had picked it yet, which seemed strange because it was perfect. I didn't think too hard about it and had it loaded into my car. When I got home, I set the tree up in the corner of my living room. It fit like it belonged there, filling the room with the unmistakable scent of Christmas. I spent hours decorating it with my favorite ornaments, twinkling lights, and a silver star on top. By the time I finished, it looked like something out of a holiday catalog. I felt proud until later that evening. Around midnight, I was sitting on the couch, sipping cocoa, and admiring the tree when I noticed the lights flickered. It wasn't the usual flicker you'd get from a loose connection. It was rhythmic, almost like a pulse. I checked the plug, thinking it was just faulty wiring, but everything was fine. As I stared at the lights, they stopped flickering, but then something else caught my eye. One of the ornaments of glass snowflakes started to swing. There wasn't a draft and the heat wasn't on. I told myself it was just settling after being hung, but the hairs on the back of my neck told me otherwise. The next few days, the tree got weirder. One night, I woke up to the sound of rustling, like someone brushing past the branches. I assumed it was my cat Milo messing around, but when I got up to check, he was curled up on my bed, fast asleep. Another time I noticed that ornaments had moved. At first I thought I'd just forgotten where I placed them, but the movements became too deliberate. A silver bell that had been on the bottom branch was now on the top, right near the star. The worst was the smell. By the third day, the fresh pine scent I loved was gone, replaced by something sour and earthy, like damp soil. No matter how much I sprayed air freshener or cleaned around the base, the smell wouldn't go away. One night I invited my friend Jenna over. She's a no-nonsense type and always talks me down when I get in my head. When she arrived, I told her everything: the flickering lights, the moving ornaments, and the smell. She laughed it off, saying I was letting my imagination run wild. But then she went quiet, staring at the tree. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she swore she saw one of the branches move, almost like it had twitched. To prove a point, she walked up to the tree and gave it a hard shake. A couple of ornaments fell, but nothing else happened. She looked at me and said I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe her, but something in her voice told me she wasn't so sure. That night, things escalated. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a loud crash. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone for light and went into the living room. The tree had tipped over, ornaments shattered across the floor. As I started picking up the pieces, I noticed something strange. The tree stand was still upright, which didn't make sense. For the tree to fall, the stand would have had to tip too. It was like the tree had jumped out of it. Then I saw the base. The trunk wasn't just a clean cut anymore. It looked twisted, almost like it had grown roots. The bark was darker, almost black, and sticky to the touch. I backed away, trying to convince myself I was just tired, but deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. The next morning, I decided to get rid of it. I called the lot owner, but when I told him about the tree, he got defensive. He said the tree came from an old property on the edge of town, one that had been abandoned for decades. When I asked why, he muttered something about bad land and hung up. I didn't have time to think about what he meant. I just wanted the tree gone. Dragging it out to the curb was a nightmare. The branches seemed heavier, and the needles left scratches on my arms. When I finally got it outside, I felt a wave of relief. But that wasn't the end. That night, I heard rustling outside my window. Pulling back the curtain, I saw the tree lying where I'd left it, but something was different. The branches seemed fuller, almost like they were reaching out. The next morning, it was gone. I didn't see the garbage truck, and none of my neighbors claimed to have taken it. It was like the tree had vanished. Since then, I've avoided real trees. I stick to a small, fake one that doesn't smell or move. But every so often I catch a whiff of that sour, earthy scent, and I can't help but wonder if the tree is still out there, waiting for someone else to take it home. I've always had a soft spot for snow globes. They remind me of my grandma, who had a huge collection displayed on a wooden shelf in her living room. She'd let me shake them as a kid, and I loved watching the tiny snowflakes swirl around quaint little scenes. So when I stumbled across an antique snow globe at a local flea market last December, I couldn't resist. It was tucked away on a dusty table surrounded by mismatched niche knickknacks and old holiday decorations. The globe caught my eye because it was larger than most, almost the size of a bowling ball. Inside was a beautiful winter village, complete with a frozen lake, tiny houses, and a miniature church with a steeple. The seller, an older woman with thick glasses, seemed eager to get rid of it. She said she'd had it for years and just wanted it out of her house. She asked for $20, but I managed to haggle her down to 15. As I walked away with the globe carefully wrapped in a towel, she called after me to keep it away from the fireplace. I thought it was odd advice, but I just nodded and left. When I got home, I placed the snow globe on the mantel above my fireplace, where it looked perfect. It added a touch of charm to my holiday decor, and I spent a good few minutes just staring at the tiny details inside the snow-covered rooftops, the little figures ice skating on the lake, and the faint shimmer of glitter in the snow that night. I noticed something strange. As I was heading to bed, I passed through the living room and heard a faint sound, like distant humming. At first I thought it was my TV, but when I turned it off, the sound didn't stop. It seemed to be coming from the snow globe. I leaned in close, and sure enough, the humming grew louder. It sounded almost like a choir singing, but the words were too muffled to understand. I told myself it was probably some kind of wind-up mechanism, even though I hadn't noticed any way to wind it. I gave it a shake, and the sound stopped, so I went to bed thinking nothing of it. The next day, I had friends over for a Christmas movie marathon. Everyone loved the snow globe. My friend Sarah picked it up to examine it and said it was one of the prettiest she'd ever seen. But then she frowned and asked if it was supposed to sing. I asked her what she meant, and she said she thought she heard music coming from it. None of us could hear anything, but Sarah seemed unsettled. She put the globe down and avoided looking at it for the rest of the evening. That night, the singing returned, louder this time. It wasn't just humming anymore. I could make out actual words, though they were in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded ancient, almost like a chant. I tried to ignore it, but around midnight, the singing stopped abruptly, replaced by a sharp cracking sound. I turned on the lights and saw a small crack in the globe, running from the base up to the tiny church. I was upset, thinking I must have shaken it too hard earlier, but then I noticed something chilling. The figures inside the globe had moved. The skaters, who had been scattered across the frozen lake, were now all clustered together in a tight circle. The little houses seemed darker, and the glitter in the snow looked duller, almost gray. I told myself I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next few nights were worse. The singing became a nightly occurrence, and each time, the crack in the globe grew larger. The figures inside continued to move, always gathering closer to the church. One morning I noticed a new figure inside a tall, shadowy figure standing just outside the church door. I knew it hadn't been there before. Desperate for answers, I went back to the flea market to find the seller. She wasn't there, but another vendor said she'd packed up and left town. When I asked about the snow globe, he got quiet and said she'd been trying to get rid of it for years. He wouldn't say why, but he suggested I throw it away. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I moved the globe to my spare bedroom, thinking distance would help. But that night, the singing was louder than ever. It didn't matter how many doors I closed, the sound filled the entire house. I barely slept, and when I went to check on the globe the next morning, the crack had spread so far that a small chunk of the glass had fallen away. Through the opening, I saw something horrifying. The figures weren't just moving, they were changing. The skaters' faces had twisted into expressions of fear, and the shadowy figure by the church door was now inside, standing at the pulpit. The glitter snow was gone, replaced by dark, swirling ash. That was it. I decided I had to get rid of it. I wrapped the globe in a towel and drove to the edge of town, where there's a deep ravine. I hurled it over the edge and watched it shatter on the rocks below. The singing stopped instantly, replaced by an eerie silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. But the story doesn't end there. A few days later, I was cleaning the living room when I noticed something on the mantel where the globe had been. It was a small pile of ash, perfectly shaped like the base of the globe. Since then, I've kept my distance from anything antique. The memory of that singing snow globe still haunts me, and every so often I swear I hear faint humming in the middle of the night. Every year, my family had a tradition of picking out a new ornament for the Christmas tree. My mom loved angels, so when we found a delicate glass angel at a local thrift store last December, it seemed perfect. The angel was small, about the size of my hand, with gold-painted wings and tiny, piercing blue eyes, I'll admit, something about it gave me an odd feeling. The eyes seemed too lifelike, almost as if they were watching me. But my mom adored it, and it cost only $5, so we brought it home and placed it at the top of our tree. That first night, I noticed the tree lights flickered more than usual. We had an older string of lights, so I figured they were just on their last legs. I unplugged them before bed, but when I came downstairs the next morning, the lights were on again. I asked my mom if she'd plugged them back in, but she swore she hadn't. My dad laughed it off, saying the outlet was probably faulty. Still, it was strange. That night things got weirder. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a faint noise coming from downstairs. It was soft, almost like a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was rhythmic, like someone chanting. My first thought was that my dad had fallen asleep in front of the TV, so I crept downstairs to check. The living room was dark, except for the Christmas tree. The lights were on, twinkling softly, even though I was sure I'd unplugged them. And then I saw it. The angel on top of the tree was glowing faintly, a soft golden light emanating from its glass body. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the tree lights, but the glow pulsed, dimming and brightening like a heartbeat. The whispering grew louder, and I realized it was coming from the angel. I froze, staring at it. The eyes, those piercing blue eyes, seemed to be looking directly at me. I felt an overwhelming sense of unease, like I was being watched by something that wasn't human. I turned on every light in the room and yanked the plug from the outlet. The lights went out and the whispering stopped, but the angel's glow lingered for a few seconds before fading away. The next morning I told my parents about what had happened. My mom looked worried, but my dad dismissed it as a bad dream. He said I was probably just overtired from all the holiday prep. I wanted to believe him, but that night it happened again. The whispering woke me around the same time, and once again I found the tree lights on and the angel glowing. This time the whispers were clearer, though I still couldn't understand the words. It sounded like a mix of English and another language, something older, almost ancient. When I got closer to the tree, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the air, even though the thermostat was set to 70 degrees. The angel's glow intensified as I reached out to touch it. The moment my fingers brushed against the glass, I felt a jolt like an electric shock. I stumbled back, and for a split second I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing behind the tree. It disappeared when I blinked, leaving me shaken. I decided not to tell my parents about this. My dad already thought I was overreacting, and my mom loved the angel too much to get rid of it. But I started keeping a flashlight and a Bible by my bed, just in case. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. The whispers grew louder and more insistent, sometimes lasting for hours. Objects near the tree began to move on their own. A stocking fell off the mantel. A wrapped gift slid across the floor, and one of the ornaments shattered for no apparent reason. The angel itself seemed to change. The once delicate glass looked darker, almost like it was stained, and the golden wings had taken on a tarnished hue. The eyes, which had already unsettled me, now seemed almost predatory. On Christmas Eve, things reached a breaking point. We had family over for dinner, and everyone commented on how beautiful the tree looked. I couldn't stop glancing at the angel, half expecting it to start glowing in front of everyone. Around 10 p.m., after everyone had left, I went to turn off the tree lights. As I reached for the plug, the angel fell from the top of the tree, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. When I picked it up, the glass was ice cold. The whisper started again, louder this time, and the room filled with the sound of shattering glass. Every ornament on the tree exploded, leaving shards scattered across the floor. My mom screamed, and my dad tried to blame it on a faulty string of lights. But I knew the angel was responsible. I grabbed it and ran outside, ignoring my parents' protests. The wind was bitterly cold, but I didn't care. I sprinted to the fire pit in our backyard, threw the angel in, and lit a match. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fire roared to life, the flames shooting up like a bonfire. The whispers turned into a deafening wail, and I thought I saw a shadow dart through the flames before everything went still. The fire burned out quickly, leaving nothing but ash. When I went back inside, the living room felt lighter, almost peaceful. My parents didn't say much, but I think they knew something wasn't right with that angel. We didn't talk about it again, and the rest of the holiday passed without incident, but I've stayed away from thrift stores ever since. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear faint whispers coming from the backyard. I tell myself it's just the wind, but deep down I know better.